And we're live. Welcome back to today's national weather forecast. We've got two big stories we're going to be talking about today. One, that low that moved through Southern California and Arizona yesterday will now be working its way into the Central Plains and down into Texas and the rest of the Southeast. Along the way, it's going to do two different things. As it moves through Kansas and Oklahoma, it's going to bring some rain, possibly some thunderstorms. There is a chance for some hail. But then as it goes through New Mexico and Texas, it's going to bring extreme wind gusts of 40 to 45 miles per hour. The same factor that we were talking about in Arizona yesterday is now moving with that system, and we have that wildfire threat there as well. So we'll be diving into that, as well as what's going on the western half of the country. There's a number of storms on the horizon. One that looks to be coming into NorCal and Oregon, especially along the coast, over the next couple of days, and then all next week it looks like California could be getting rain and snow as a storm just slowly moves across for Monday through Friday. So if we want to see all that another way, there's that low that's going to be bringing some snow to places like Colorado, and then that rain bringing some possible thunderstorms to Kansas, Oklahoma, before that just disappears into the Gulf of Mexico. So it could bring some thunderstorms to Louisiana as well. But as that's going through, right here where we're not getting the precipitation, that's where that wildfire threat will be persisting. There's warm temperatures, there's low relative humidity, and there's going to be extreme wind gusts. So we're going to dive into that red flag warning that's in place between New Mexico and Texas. And then on the left side of the screen, you can see that first system pushing into the west here. It's going to hang right on the coast for quite some time, piling up large amounts of rainfall right there through Washington, Oregon, very northern California, before swinging through. And then this next one following behind it looks to be a slowly developing storm that'll bring rain and snow to California almost all next week. And both that second storm and that third storm that we're going to be talking about for the west have changed significantly from both yesterday's forecast and the day before. So just going to say up front, we're going to have to continue to watch these closely because it doesn't seem like the models have really figured out what's going to happen yet. So we'll have to continue to follow that in future forecasts. So with that being said, you might want to double check and make sure this is my most recent forecast. For example, if you were watching yesterday's, a lot of what I said yesterday is no longer true because of what we're going to be going over today looks completely different. And then also I always say if you're only interested in one of these stories, you can go down in the comments below where I put the timestamps so you'll be able to click directly to the region you're most interested in. So let's just look at the overall pattern of what's going on. I think this is sometimes the easiest way to see a storm. There's that low pressure system, the cutoff low, that brought some rain and snow to Southern California and that fire threat we were talking about yesterday for Arizona. Well, now, as that low, as we continue to follow it, moves across, it's going to do a similar thing to what we were talking about yesterday, except now that rain is going to be up here in Kansas and Oklahoma, and since we're now in the plains working into the southeast, some of this rain will actually be in the form of thunderstorms, possibly some hail. And then that fire threat is now shifting down into New Mexico and Texas with that little low pressure system there. And then behind that, you can see that next system, which looks like it got a little bit smaller than yesterday. Yesterday, it looked like it was stretching all the way down into the central coast. Now it looks like it's just going to skim through very northern California and for a very brief period of time. So while I'd say that system right there looks smaller, this third one, I would say now looks bigger. You can see it just continues to fill in. It starts coming in on Monday, and then you're going to see this low just continually rotating and slowly moving over California. That's going to allow us to pick up rain and snow from possibly Monday into Friday, from the Oregon border all the way down to San Diego. So that's going to be great when it comes to a lot of the things we've been talking about the drought and future fire conditions in California. That is certainly going to help. So again, if we want to see that another way, there's that low pressure system. That's where it's bringing that rain to Kansas and Oklahoma. It's going to continue to bring some possible thunderstorms down into Arkansas, Louisiana. and then just disappear into the Gulf of Mexico. Now, something else to note on this map is that overall, there's not that much going on. If we look back at the warnings map, in the grand scheme of things, there's not all that much happening across the country, so I would say this is some great news. It's pretty typical with weather where there's a hurricane or a massive wildfire or ice storms or tornadoes. And right now, we do have the high wind warnings here in California and Oregon, and we do have this fire threat that we're talking about. But for the most part, I would say this is a pretty great warnings map right here. There's not a lot going on, and the things that are going on aren't critical. And it could be critical if a wildfire were to start, but as of right now, I'd say we're looking pretty good when it comes to extreme weather. And what made me think of that was looking at this precipitation map. For the majority of the country, there is absolutely nothing going on. And so, except for, of course, where there is something going on, that low going through Oklahoma and a couple of systems going through the west, which is why those are going to be the things we're talking about today. So as this system moves into the west, this is the first of the two that we're going to be diving into for Washington, Oregon, and California. You'll notice it just hangs around the coast for a long period of time before finally dipping down into NorCal, bringing what looks to be some heavy snow into the Sierras. Then after that, there's going to be some scattered rain and snow with a second tiny little low that moves through Washington. Not going to spend too much time on that. And then once again, look at this. As we're getting all this rain and snow in the west, there is nothing for the entire eastern half of the country. That's why for what could be the next week or two, I'm mostly going to be following the west unless anything changes in the forecast for the east, because the west is where the storms are happening. So this is as that second one starts to come in Monday and Tuesday. You'll notice there's no period where it just looks like intense rain or snow. It looks to just continue to drop rain and snow as it slowly moves over the region. You remember that storm is the one that's slowly rotating as it moves across. And then maybe that'll start to bring some more weather to the Midwest and the Northeast later in the forecast. This is all the way getting into mid-March, and it looks like this is the first chance for any real weather to happen to the eastern half of the country, at least as of right now. I guarantee forecast models will change, but what ends up happening in the west moves into the east, and then we'll have to track those to see. A number of them look like they'll be going through the Midwest in mid-March after they come through the west, so we'll have to follow to see what happens there. Possibility of some more major snowstorms, maybe. For the most part, when we look at the climate forecast, though, it looks like we're going to be warm, so I'd expect we're mostly going to be getting rainfall with whatever storms move through the eastern half of the country. So just looking at the snapshot of the precipitation, you can see that precip starting to creep into Washington throughout tonight into Friday, and then there's that low pressure system that'll be cutting through Kansas, Oklahoma, down into Louisiana, and then it just goes off into the Gulf of Mexico. So right there is where we're most likely going to see the possibility for the largest thunderstorms as that low moves through. And then again, also notice that part where we have the fire danger threat, no precipitation whatsoever. That's why that threat exists right there, and for a number of other reasons that we're going to be going through in this video. And then you also see, especially along the coast, remember that rainfall just appeared to be stalling out on the coast for quite some time. That's where we're going to get maybe 2 to 3 inches of rain stretching from the Washington coast down to very northern California. Something you'll notice though is that system is no longer moving into central and southern California. That's the big change. It looks like every time the models update, it has that system pulling up farther and farther north. So where originally it was showing that was going to hit directly into SoCal, now it's barely just scraping through the very northern parts of California. That next system, though, tells a different story. That's the one that slowly moves across the state. That one is going to bring, or hopefully bring, this is a ways off in the forecast at this point, so it's a bit shaky on the confidence. But this one looks like it's going to bring rain and snow to almost all of California, and some decent precipitation with that. At that point, we could have an inch or two built up along the coast. Overall, I don't think it's going to be enough to get us out of some of the deficits we're in, but it's certainly going to help, and it's not at least drying us out. So there's the snowfall. As we click through here, you notice there is some light snowfall up in the northeast. I'm not going to spend any time on that today because it's just an inch or two. It's not any major snowstorm, and there's other things to talk about. As we see that snowfall does build into Colorado. By the time it gets to Kansas and Oklahoma, the temperatures are warm enough where that's just going to be falling as rain. And then with that first one, that one that dips through the very northern parts of California, you'll notice how that changed since yesterday's forecast. Yesterday's forecast, it had it digging down a little farther, and the Sierras were getting over a foot of snow. Now it looks like it's just going to scrape the very northern parts of California, still getting a foot of snow up there, but less in the Sierras. It's a different story when we combine it with that next system that goes through. So this is looking at by about this time next week. This is where the snowfall is supposed to fall. As you can see, Midwest and Northeast looks like in the next week they're just getting maybe an inch or two of snowfall. Not a lot happening on the eastern half of the country, which is actually what our climate forecasts were saying was going to happen last week. So that's why I actually trust those 1 to 2 week climate forecasts now, because so far it's looking like they're pretty good. And remember, they also said that California was going to be getting some precip and Washington was going to be getting less. And I was a little hesitant to think that a week ago because that was when California was completely dry and Washington was getting storm after storm. Well, as you can see, that precipitation appears to have shifted down more into California, which again is great for the drought and great for future fire danger. So this is looking at by next week, there are large portions of the Northwest that appear to be getting at least 4 inches of snow. Select areas in Montana, Utah, Colorado getting 6 to 8 inches, maybe up to a foot. And then in the Sierras, California is really the key spot I'm most likely going to be following for the next week, because you can see that's where the weather is happening. By this time next week, it looks like we could have picked up 2 to 3 feet of snow on top of all that rainfall that we're going to be getting along the coast. So another thing to look at and keep your eye on is what's going on with the wind gusts. Right there you can see where those wind gusts were yesterday and this morning. That's why we were talking about the fire danger threat in Arizona yesterday. Well, as that storm moves through, remember that's the little cutoff low that moved through SoCal and then it's working its way up into Colorado, Kansas, and Oklahoma. As it moves through, it's going to bring those same extreme wind gusts that it brought to Arizona yesterday. Now they're going to be moving into New Mexico and parts of Texas, getting gusts up to 40, maybe even 50 miles per hour in those areas. And again, that's why we have the fire threat there. Temperatures are warm, the area is dry, but I believe it's mostly because of these wind gusts you see right there throughout both today and tomorrow, where we're going to have gusts up to 50 miles per hour mixed with some dry air and some dry fuels. So that's the key thing with the wind gusts. There are going to be some periods of extreme winds in the northwest. For example, right now we actually have a high wind warning, but it's not mixed with any kind of fire threat. It's actually mixed with rain. So I'm more concerned about the winds when it comes to Texas and New Mexico, where we actually have that fire threat. So this is the temperature anomalies. Let's go to this afternoon to see what kind of temperature anomalies we can be expecting. And for the most part, the country looks relatively mild. It might be a little colder than average in the northeast, a little warmer than average in the southeast, and then the key spot that stands out to me is up here in North Dakota, South Dakota, and Minnesota. That's where there actually is a large anomaly. That's where the temperatures are 20 to 25 degrees above average up there. And that appears to be sticking around for quite some time. We're going to have those 25 degree above average temperatures hanging around up there, while mild temperatures persist throughout much of the rest of the country, all the way getting into this weekend. And then as we get into even next week, you'll see those extremely warm above average temperatures are still relatively over the same region and actually starting to work into the Midwest at this point. So 25 to 30 degrees above average midweek next week for most of the Midwest, and then the entire eastern half of the country looks to be above average, while the west on average is going to be a little bit colder than usual. If we want to see the temperatures themselves, let's just go to this afternoon to see what kind of temps we can have. You can see North Dakota, South Dakota, we're in the 40s and 50s. It's almost similar temperatures to what we're getting down in much more southern states where it should be a lot warmer. And then you notice the Northeast is below freezing. You can tell quickly by looking at this map if you have that blue color. That's where you have those below freezing temperatures through parts of the Midwest and the Northeast. But just a quick look at the map, majority of the country is looking pretty warm in at least the 40s and 50s. And then down here in Texas and New Mexico, where we have that fire threat, that's where we're in the 60s and 70s. So that's the warmest place in the country. That's also where we have the most extreme winds. So it makes sense that that's where our fire danger threat is, even though we're only in the beginning of March. When you haven't been getting that much rainfall, it doesn't really matter what season it is. If the fuels are dry and it's windy and warm, you can have a fire threat. So that's everything that's happening in the next 3 to 5 days. Now let's look at the extended forecast to see what we can expect in the future. And this actually goes along pretty well with what we were just looking at. Looks like for the most part, from March 11th to March 17th, this is an average, there's a high probability that the western half of the country is going to be cold, while the eastern half of the country is going to be warm. So it's interesting to combine that with the precipitation probability outlook for the same time period. So this is 8 to 14 days out, again, the averages, and it looks like that rain and precipitation is expected to continue for California. So for California, where we're mixing this precipitation with those colder than average temperatures, I would say that means that we can expect to get some more snowfall in the Sierras throughout this month. Now, on the flip side, up here in the Midwest, where we see that rain stretching through the Midwest and the Ohio Valley, we're at least expected to get some precip 8 to 14 days out. We're going to be mixing that with above average temperatures. So I'm thinking majority of that precipitation will actually be falling as rain. And I guess only time will tell if that actually happens. Something else you'll notice though is that area down there in New Mexico and Texas where we have the fire threat today, expected to continue to be dry. So that's going to be a spot I'll continue to look at for any fire threats in the future. If we want to go far out into the forecast, it paints a different picture of what's going on. It looks like 3 months out, the average of what's going to happen over the next 3 months, it looks like almost the entire country is expected to have above average warm temperatures, and especially down here in New Mexico and Texas. And then if we look at the precip for 3 months out, it looks a little bit different, especially down here on the southwest. It looks like even though we might be getting some great rainfall and some snow over the next 2 weeks, in the 3 month average, it looks like we're going to be pretty dry. So I'll just take a second to address somebody's comment yesterday. They were asking me what I thought the wildfire outlook was going to be like for this next season, if I thought it was going to be as bad as last season was, because last season was just about as bad as a wildfire season could possibly get. So there's a few different factors at play. One is how much precipitation we might get in the next 8 to 14 days. As of right now, it looks like we have a number of storms coming in. Currently, I don't think it's going to be enough to make up for some of our deficits, but it's certainly going to help. And who knows, maybe some of these storms will end up being absolutely massive and we'll get a ton of rainfall that'll bring a bunch of moisture to our fuels and help us out with the drought scenario. On the long range forecast though, it looks like we're going to be dry, and especially down in Southern California where the fuels already are very dry. So just taking that into account, our current rainfall deficits and the 3 month dry average being shown here, I'm hesitant to say, I'm thinking it's going to not be it's not great outlook for the wildfire season. I guess that's the way to say it. It's certainly not good news, but when compared to last year, there's a key factor that is different. That the reason last year was so especially bad was because of that one thunderstorm or the series of thunderstorms that pushed through that one day and started hundreds of fires all across the state, basically overwhelmed our resources and allowed a lot of the fires that, if they had occurred by themselves, maybe wouldn't have been that big of a deal, but because we had hundreds of fires due to all of those lightning fires that started in one day, a lot of those fires were able to grow out of control, and then that's why last year ended up being so bad. Now, a storm like that lightning storm we had last year that really kicked off the wildfire season, which led to the LNU, the SCU, the CZU, the August complex, all those massive wildfires that I was talking about all last season. Now, that lightning storm that caused all that is a fairly rare event. I could find one instance where that happened about 10 years ago, where a similar case where it just started hundreds of fires all across the state, but that was pretty rare. So I don't think the chances of that happening again this next year are all that high. So even though it might be dry, there's going to be a lot of dry fuels, and we'll have all the same kind of wildfire characteristics, the possibility of a lightning event like that happening again, I don't think that's going to happen. At least I'm crossing my fingers hoping it doesn't. So if I had to give my wildfire forecast for next season, I would say it's not going to be as bad as last season. That might not be all that crazy of a statement considering last season was about as bad as it gets. So I didn't really even mean to go into that tangent, but I thought that was an interesting comment somebody posted yesterday, so I thought I'd just give my answer to that comment because it's never too early to start thinking about wildfire season. So with all that said, and with that tangent being done, now let's actually start to dive into the individual regions and talk about some of the different stories, especially down here in the Central Plains in Texas, and then we'll dive into the West. So I want to start by following this low that's currently moving through Colorado and then down into Kansas, Oklahoma, and then eventually going to move down into the Gulf of Mexico. As that happens, again, that's what's bringing the possible thunderstorms to Kansas and Oklahoma, and then that fire threat to Texas and New Mexico. Seen another way, right there you could see it bringing that snow into Colorado. Here's where it starts to bring that rain into Kansas and Oklahoma. It moves down, brings some rain to Louisiana, and then it disappears into the Gulf of Mexico. Notice it goes straight south instead of like a lot of the other storms we've seen this season that go up into the Midwest. That one appears to be moving down south, and it most likely has to do with the overall pattern. If we look at it, the overall pattern is tilted down in that direction, so it actually makes sense that that low is going to get pushed in that direction. You think that the winds at this point are flowing from Minnesota into Kentucky, so it's that overall flow that's steering that low into the Gulf of Mexico. If it was the opposite, if it was something like this, where the winds would be flowing from south to north, that's where that low would be kicking up into the Midwest. But as you can see, it's not expected to. So on the precip map, that's exactly what we're seeing. It's not going up anywhere else. It's going right through that region down to Louisiana and then into the Gulf of Mexico. So taking a closer view, this is as we get into this afternoon, Colorado is going to be getting some snow, and then we start to get that rain building into tonight and early Friday morning for Kansas and Oklahoma. And although at first glance, it looks like light rain, I normally probably wouldn't even be spending any time on this because it looks like such light rain, but I did read in a National Weather forecast, or a National Weather Service forecast, that they're expecting some thunderstorms, possibly some hail. So I thought I'd mention this precipitation, even though it's not the big part of the story. I think the big part of the story in this region is the fire threat. So there's what's expected. When it comes to the precip going through Kansas and Oklahoma, there are some places that could pick up an inch. For the most part, it's just widespread, maybe 0.2 inches of rain as that steers its way down into Louisiana. So like I said, it just looks like light rain. There's no period where it looks like we're in this yellow or orange color, which we've certainly had throughout this region in some past forecasts. But again, there is the possibility of some thunderstorms, so I thought I'd mention it. Let's look at the exact timing. Looks like it could start coming in 6 p.m. Thursday, starts to build up 12 a.m. Friday, And then right there's the low, right on the Texas-Oklahoma border. And then it looks like majority of Oklahoma continuing to get rainfall from 6 a.m. Friday into 12 p.m. Friday before moving off. So just thought I'd mention that possibility of some thunderstorms there. Although what I think is the key story in this region is that fire threat. We got that red flag warning up between New Mexico and Texas, and then that high wind warning stretching down all the way almost into Mexico. So I think that is the big story right there. So what we're going to do is exactly what we did yesterday. We're going to look at all the different aspects that get put into the models that tell us if there is fire danger. Things like temperature, winds, humidity, fuel moisture, and drought. So we'll look at the temperatures first. Let's look at the exact timing of when that was coming through again. It looks like it's going to start to push throughout the day, Thursday and Friday. So I think we actually have to look at both Thursday and Friday here. Looking at Thursday afternoon, this is what we're expected to get. You can see warm temperatures down there. And when we were looking at the national overview, you'll notice that was just about the warmest place in the country. We're in the mid to even high 70s in some places, and exactly where we have that red flag warning and that high wind warning. It's really, when it comes to wildfire, it's never one factor. That's something I'm finding out in my research right now. It's the combination of everything. There's no period where you say, oh, it's warm, there's going to be a fire threat. It's more like it's warm, dry, windy, dry fuels. All of the things have to combine. And as you'll see in this forecast, that is what's causing that fire danger threat in this area. So we're looking warm today in the mid 70s. Let's look at what the temperatures were going to be like tomorrow. Tomorrow it actually looks like it's a bit cooler. So we're in the 50s tomorrow. That's good news temperature-wise when it comes to the fire threat. And even today, I would say mid 70s isn't all that crazy for this location. That alone certainly wouldn't be causing this fire threat. Here's what I think is, and it's the extreme winds. Starting throughout the day today, we're going to start to see some 30 to 40 mile per hour gusts come in, and then as we get into this evening, into tonight, that's where the gusts get up to 45 and 50 miles per hour. So we're mixing those average temperatures around 70, 75 degrees with extreme winds. This is 40 to 50 miles per hour. And that is going to continue into Friday. So where the temperatures seem to ease up on Friday, it looks like those wind gusts might actually even be getting stronger right where we have that red flag warning between New Mexico and Texas, where we see those 50 mile per hour wind gusts. And then the good news is it's gone and we're back to mild conditions as we get into this weekend. So temperatures are warm. Winds, I think, are the bigger factor as we have some 50 mile per hour gusts. Humidity is the other thing to look at. And with humidity, it's not just at the actual time. It actually matters both the hour before, the day before, the month before. It's a very ongoing process because it interacts with the fuels. And you think about it, if the air is dry, the fuels get dry. If the fuels are dry, it's easier to start a fire and it's easier for that fire to burn. So as we get into today, or you can see yesterday we had extremely dry air over that region. That's pre-drying out some of these fuels before any of those winds come in. Then as we go into today, that dry air is going to continue, so a lot of those fuels are getting even drier. Then on Friday, luckily it looks like we'll be bringing in a little bit of moisture, so that's at least some good news for Friday's forecast. So the big thing that humidity has an effect on, like I was just saying, is the effect it has on the fuels. And it is an ongoing process. So when you're actually talking about fuels, you talk about them with 10-hour, 100-hour, and 1,000-hour fuels. Now, what that exactly means is just how big the fuel is. 10-hour fuels are about a half an inch in diameter. These are the ones that get affected by moisture in as short a period of time as 10 hours. So how dry it was in the last 10 hours changes how dry these fuels are. And then some bigger fuels where it's about 3 to 8 or 1 to 3 inches, that's the 100-hour fuels, that's where it takes 100 hours for those to react to the dryness of the air around them. 1,000-hour fuels are something like 3 inches to 8 inches in diameter, and it takes 1,000 hours for them to reflect the overall humidity patterns that they've been in. But so looking at the 10-hour fuels, this is a key thing to look at for identifying if a fire, what's the danger of a fire starting, because it's often in lighter fuels that a fire begins, things like grasses or twigs, things that are half an inch or smaller. You can see right there in New Mexico and Texas, where we had that dry air yesterday, about 10 hours ago, that is where we have what looks to be about the driest fuels in the entire country, right there and right there, which is unfortunately exactly where those extreme wind gusts were pushing through, right through New Mexico and Texas, and then down here almost into the Mexico border. So the light fuels are looking about as dry as they could be in that region. If we look at the 100-hour fuels, the ones that are 1 to 3 inches in diameter, again, that same exact region looking to be about as dry as anywhere else in the country. Looking at the 1,000-hour fuels, which is the bigger fuels, so if a fire is going to get very large, this is where you start to take into account the 1,000-hour fuels. That can lead to some more extreme fire behavior if a lot of your larger fuels are dry. And again, it looks like that is relatively dry. It's not as dry as some parts of Southern California and Arizona, but still on the drier side, especially compared with the overall country averages. So just to sum up everything so far, temperatures in the mid-70s, so that's relatively normal, it's warm. We could just actually look at these. Temperatures were mid-70s, it's relatively warm. Wind gusts, that's where the anomaly comes through, that's where it's 40 to 50 mile per hour wind gusts. Humidity is dry, getting down into maybe 10 to 15%. Our light fuels are dry, our medium fuels are dry, our large fuels are dry, and you'll notice this is an area that is in exceptional drought. If you don't know, that's about as bad as a drought can get, even though the term exceptional sounds like a good thing. I always say this, but exceptional is as bad as a drought gets. That's what that burgundy color, I think that's what burgundy is, maybe maroon, I don't know, maybe let me know in the comments what color you think that is. That's where we see this exceptional drought in place, and severe drought. It was down here in Arizona as well, that's why we were talking about for Arizona yesterday, but you can see it's also throughout New Mexico, exactly where we have those dry fuels, and exactly where we have those 40 to 50 mile per hour wind gusts. So taking all those things into combination, you basically just did what a wildfire scientist does when trying to figure out fire danger or build a model for fire danger. Temperature, winds, humidity, fuel moisture, drought index, all of that to create your forecast fire danger class. So taking a look at the map, you can see Arizona is now in the clear. So that looks like that fire danger we had yesterday has moved out. Where it has moved is up where we've been talking about in New Mexico and Texas, and then down here almost onto the Mexico border. That's where we have, looks like high is that yellow color, the orange is very high, and then that red is extreme fire danger. So that's why we're going over that in this region. I think that's the big story to talk about there, and that's why we have that red flag warning. Hopefully nothing happens. It's still very early in the season for any big wildfires to kick up, but that is one of the few warnings we have on this map. So, and I figured it'd be a good chance to go through some wildfire science, which is one of my favorite things to talk about. So that's something to think about. Hopefully it just passes and we're all good down there. So on this map, you can also see the only other place on the country. That's something I've been saying throughout this video. Overall, not a whole lot going on across the country. Almost the entire eastern half of the country has barely any warnings whatsoever. We've got that red flag warning we were just discussing, and then we've got some action going on the west. So that's what we're going to talk about next. Right there, that right there is a high wind warning, and it's showing that storm is approaching. So there's that low that went through Southern California yesterday. Hopefully we got some good rain down there. Let me know if you live in San Diego, if you ended up getting some good rain down there. And then here's the next one we're following. This one like I said, it's changed from yesterday, and it changes actually every time we look at this forecast. Remember, the first time I showed this, the first time we started talking about this, I think it was on Monday, this was breaking off into its own little cutoff low and hitting Southern California. Then yesterday, it looked like it was going to go through the central coast, and now it looks like it's just going to be scraping the very northern parts of California. So it's going to be less widespread impacts and a bit smaller than was originally forecasted, and hitting a completely different region than the very first forecast showed. And then behind that, this is the one that has changed in the forecast as well, but instead of looking like it's smaller with less impacts, this looks like it's actually getting bigger with more impacts. You'll watch, this large trough comes in Monday, and there's a few things I notice as it starts to come in. One, the isobars don't look that close together, which tells you it's not going to be all that extreme of a storm. When you get the isobars very close together, that's where you get some extreme storm behavior. But even though it doesn't look like it's going to be all that extreme, it slowly moves over the region. You notice it's just rotating right there as it slowly moves across California all the way from Monday to Friday. So let's just go back so we could see that again. There's the first one, and then right here it starts to come in, and then it just slowly rotates as it goes across California. So although it might not be an extreme storm by any standards where there's extreme winds and extreme rainfall, it'll be a slow moving storm that's able to drop rain and snow for a long period of time, slowly building up our totals, which in my opinion is the best kind of storm to have, because when you get those storms where it drops large totals in 5 hours, that's where you get significant property damages. When you can just slowly build up totals for a long period of time, it gives the environment and people a longer time period to prepare and deal with whatever's going on. So looking at the rainfall, one thing you'll notice, it just slowly stays along the coast right there. It just hangs out, and then with that second one, it looks to be just continual rain and snow over California for what looks to be a long period of time. So two different systems. The first one looks like it's up into Northern California. The second one looks like it's a slow mover, just constant rain and snow all the way through Monday into next Friday. And then this is also responding to a comment yesterday. Somebody said they're going to cancel their Yosemite plans next week. I would be hesitant to cancel them yet, because if there's anything I've learned this week with how the models are predicting these systems, it seems to be changing every single time I look at it, which tells me that the models don't have all that much confidence yet on what's going to happen. So right now, I think California is going to be getting precipitation, some rain and snow next week, but I'm going off the current models, and the current models seem to be changing a lot. So maybe don't cancel any plans for next week yet, but we're just going to have to wait and see, and I'm going to be following these every single day, so I'll keep you guys updated as I learn more. So with that first one, the first storm that goes through, I want to mostly look at the northwest, because that one appears to be a more northern storm. That's the one that just scrapes through Northern California. But as you can see, it's also going to be bringing heavy rain to Washington, Oregon, and then also, again, the northern parts of California. Now, just clicking back there, you'll notice how long it just hangs out along the coast. With some storms, you see it just move through in about 24 hours and it's gone. Everyone gets an even amount of rainfall and snowfall. With this one, it's just hanging out on the coast for what appears to be 24 hours to even more time before finally dipping down, bringing that heavy snow to the Sierras. So what that's going to do is really pile up our totals right along the coast instead of evenly spreading them out to everyone. That's what's going on with that first system, and it perfectly illustrates what I'm saying. Right along the coast, we have some areas getting 2 to 3 inches of rain, and then once you get inland into eastern parts of Washington and Oregon, you might not even be getting any rain whatsoever. So it's interesting to just notice how that storm just appears to be stalling out right along the coast, So from Northern California up to Washington, it looks like there's a gradient along the coast where with that first system, we're getting about 1 inch up to 2 inches in Oregon, up to 3 inches in Washington. And then we're also going to be getting some snowfall, not as much as was originally expected, especially down here in the Sierras. We'll dive into the full California forecast in a second. But there is an area up here in the Olympic Mountains where with that system, we might be getting 2 to maybe 3 feet of snow. Then in the Cascades, it looks like we're in the 4 to 6 inch range. And then in Oregon, in the Cascades in Oregon, that looks to be around 6 inches. And then in very northern parts of California, that's where we can get up to a foot of snow, maybe a foot and a half in this one little bullseye. But again, it seems like every model keeps pulling it farther north. So that bullseye, if this trend continues, might actually end up moving into Oregon. We'll just have to see about that. So now I want to look at that second system and also just the overall California forecast. Because judging on this map, you can see that the largest snow forecasts, or the most snow totals, I guess I paused right there because I actually want to click through with the next system combined with it. So the reason I was hesitant to do that at first is because it's not really affecting the Northwest all that much, especially up here in Washington and Oregon. The totals from that first system to the second didn't change all that much. The majority of it is down here in California. So that's what I actually want to focus on. Just looking at the overall pattern again, right there, there's that first trough that scrapes through Northern California, and then there's the big one that slowly moves right over California from Monday to Friday, constantly bringing rain and snow to the state, at least according to the forecast models right now. So now let's just look at California, because that looks to be where the majority of the weather is going to be happening over the next week. That's what we're looking at, the next week of weather. So that's part of what was happening. That's a snapshot of what we had yesterday, some of that rain going through Southern California. Good to see some rain finally returning to SoCal. Here's the start. This is getting into Friday afternoon. That's the start of the first system, the one that just scrapes through Northern California. And you can see this one brings some periods of heavy rain where we're getting over 0.2 inches per hour, and also some heavy snow where we're building up over 0.2 inches per hour. But it's a quick mover. It comes in Friday morning into Friday afternoon, and then it's gone by Saturday afternoon. The second one that we look at is a very different nature. This one looks to be coming in, starts on, it looks like early Monday morning. Start to see some rain and snow. That continues. There's not really any periods where it looks like very heavy rain or very heavy snow. Actually, that's looking like the storm might intensify for Southern California as we get into midweek. And then actually, that's a good thing to point out when it comes to this storm. It almost looks like it comes through as a wave. It brings some heavy rain and snow to Northern California first, and then it shifts down into Southern California. So it looks like that rain and snow is going to be widespread. And you can actually almost pair this up as that storm is rotating. It's going to bring some rain and snow into NorCal, and then it continues to rotate, bring some rain and snow to SoCal. So that's what we picked up yesterday. We might have got an inch in parts of San Diego. Here's that first system. Again, big change from what the original models were showing. This first one was supposed to hit SoCal, and NorCal was missing out. Now it looks like it's hitting NorCal, and SoCal's missing out. So this is the one that just scrapes through the very top of NorCal. And you can see it looks like North Coast getting an inch and a half of rain with that first system. Around the Bay Area, we might be getting 0.2 to 0.4 inches, stretches down past Monterey Bay, but then it stops right there. With the next one, that's the one that's much more widespread. And you'll notice it starts adding some totals up here in the north, bringing our totals for the Bay Area up over an inch. And then it moves down into Southern California, bringing our totals all along the coast. That's a perfect graphic right there to show the California coast and how much rain we might be getting in the next week. It looks like the majority of the coast is going to be getting over an inch to an inch and a half when you combine both of these systems together. So looking at the snowfall, this is another thing that has changed. Like I said, that's the first system right there. Yesterday, this first system was digging a little deeper. It looked a little bit stronger, and the Sierras were getting over a foot of snow. Now it looks like with this system, areas around Tahoe are just going to be getting maybe 1 to 4 inches, but we do still have that bullseye up in very northern California that's getting over a foot. Now the next one looks to be the bigger of the two storms. That's the one that slowly moves across the state, where we're able to continue to pile up those totals from Monday to Friday. And right there you see that this looks to be a pretty good snowstorm for California. Even though we're almost getting into spring, and I believe we're actually already in meteorological spring, which I'm pretty sure starts March 1st. I'll have to double check that. If you don't know, there's actually 2 different springs. There's the spring everyone thinks about, and then there's the spring that has to actually do with the tilt of the Earth axis. Maybe I'll do a full video about that, because obviously I have forgotten exactly what the dates are there. I think one is March 1st and one is March 17th. If you know, let me know in the comments, and you can correct me, and maybe I'll do a video covering the seasons later. So that was a bit of a tangent. So that's what we're expected to get over the next week. It looks like the Sierras getting over 2 feet of snow, and then even all the way down into Southern California, it looks like we're picking up over a foot of snow. So this goes along well with that climate forecast we were looking at earlier as in last week, where it was saying California was going to be getting some good precipitation in the 2-week forecast, and it looks like that long-range outlook appears to be coming true. Now, when it comes to the temperatures, there's something to keep your eye on. I'm mostly going to be looking at where the blue color is, because that's where you have below freezing temperatures. If it's blue, that's where you're under 32 degrees, and that's where you can pick up snow. So as that first system goes through on Saturday, it does look like very northern parts of California are just below freezing. So those areas will be able to pick up that snow as that first system moves through. And then let's go all the way into Monday. And also keep your eyes on SoCal, because it's interesting to see that they're expected to pick up a foot of snow over the next week as well. So again, just looking at that blue color where we have below freezing temperatures, this is now looking at next Tuesday, where that system is now officially over us. For the most part, California is still looking pretty warm. There are spots in the higher elevations that are below freezing. And then as that system starts to really build in towards midweek and then working into Wednesday and Thursday, that's where the majority of California is looking cold. And the mountains are looking like they're in maybe the single digits to the teens, possibly even below 0 in some places. And it's the same story all the way down here in Southern California, where we have those below freezing temperatures. So that's why as this system comes in, it's not just going to be bringing rainfall, it's going to be bringing snowfall, and maybe a foot to 2 feet of snowfall, because those temperatures are cold. Something interesting to also look at is how strong those winds will be. Like I said, there is a high wind warning up in very northern California today, especially along the coast, where we're getting some 30 to 40 mile per hour winds. As that system builds in on Saturday, continues to dig through, some of those extreme wind gusts are going to move into the Sierras, where we might even have some hurricane force gusts going into the Sierras with that system. Then it calms down throughout the weekend, and then that new one builds in Monday into Tuesday. That's where we start to get wind gusts through the South Bay that are 35 to 40 miles per hour, and then the higher elevations in that 40 mile per hour range as well, spreading down into Southern California throughout the day Tuesday. And then again, that's not just a quick moving storm. It appears to be continuing all next week. So where we get those extreme wind gusts is where we're also getting the strongest precipitation at that period of time. Wednesday, remember, that was the time where the Southern California looked like it was getting the strongest precip. That's where it's also getting the strongest winds. And then towards next weekend, that's so far off in the forecast that who's to say what's going to happen there. So as I've been talking about this, you might have noticed that I'm looking forward to these storms, which is sometimes a dangerous thing to do as a meteorologist because you're supposed to err on the side of caution. Here's the reason I'm not erring on the side of caution, and I'm actually excited for these storms to come in. It's because much of California is abnormally dry. There's even some places that are still in severe drought, and our current rainfall totals, thank you to the person who put that great link in the comments yesterday that showed the rainfall deficits across California. That was very interesting. That's part of the reason that I'm optimistic in this forecast today when it comes to these storms. Abnormally dry, severe drought. Many places are below average precipitation for the season. So this series of storms is certainly going to help. And at the end of the day, my main focus is on wildfire. So rain now is typically going to be good for wildfire in the future. So let's actually dive into the very local regions to get the exact timing. Looks like starts to show up 4 a.m. on the north coast on Friday. And then as we continue to build in through Friday, that's where some of that heavy rain stretches down into the Bay Area, which wasn't in the original forecast, but it looks like it is now. That'll be at about 10 p.m. on Friday, while we're picking up some heavy snow in northern parts of California. Then that's the one that's the quick mover. That just scrapes through real fast. It has heavy amounts of precipitation, but it doesn't last very long. So the totals with that one aren't all that large, except for right there where we're able to pick up a lot of snow, about a foot, in a very short period of time. Then it moves into the Sierras by about 4 a.m. Saturday, and then it's gone. It looks like we're clear throughout the day, Saturday into Sunday, and then the next system shows up about 4 a.m. on Monday. We start to see that rain build into the Bay Area, and then that snow return to the northern parts of California. Then we have widespread rain throughout the Bay Area as we get into Monday morning, and then that spreads east and brings some heavy snow into the Sierras by 4 p.m. on Monday. And something that's interesting about this storm that I keep noticing as I click through these, it almost looks like it comes through in pulses. So there's the first pulse right there, and then that moves down into Southern California, and it looks like it's almost done for Northern California as early as 4 a.m. on Tuesday. But then there's almost another pulse by 4 p.m. on Tuesday where some of that heavy rain returns to the Bay Area, and then we start to pick up some of that heavy snow again. And then that pulse again moves down into Southern California later into the forecast, and then by Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday, it looks like the majority of the weather has now moved down into SoCal. So, sorry, I gotta take a quick sip of water here. Sometimes happens when you're talking for 54 straight minutes. So, looking at the precipitation as you click through, that's what's expected with the first system. Again, an inch up on the north coast, Bay Area, looking like maybe 0.3 to 0.4 inches. Then as we continue to click through next Wednesday and Thursday, when that second system is pushed through, parts of the Bay Area, including San Francisco, could have 2 inches of rain. So it's interesting to see that while the first system is mostly up here in the north coast, the second system, the bigger of the two, is mostly down here in the Bay Area, and overall, the Bay Area's totals are actually going to be greater than the north coast. I mean, 1 to 2 inches up here is still a decent amount of rainfall, but 1 to 2 inches for San Francisco and down here stretching all the way down into Monterey Bay, that is interesting because it shows that that second system is mostly going to be going through the Bay Area. And then it's also going to be going through the Sierras. So that's a good way to sum up the two storms. The first one, more NorCal. The second one, more into the Bay Area and the Sierras. So the first one, that's where we had inch of rain along the coast up here, and then a foot of snow up in the very northern parts of California. Almost nothing for Tahoe, maybe an inch or two. And then with the second system, you're not actually going to see the totals increase all that much up there, maybe just another 4 to 6 inches. But then the totals in the Sierras really start to build up, getting up over 1 to 2 feet. So the first one, It's very northern California. The second one is more, I would still call this northern California, but on this map, it's more of the central parts of the state. It's not the Oregon border, at least. So it's also interesting to see how long the storm is going to be lasting in Southern California, because looking at the precip map, just going back, it basically looks like we're done by Wednesday night. So it's interesting to see, since these storms are moving from north to south, if they're hanging around longer in Southern California, which just by common sense, it would seem like they would be getting the storms later in next week because the storms are moving from north to south. And it also would make sense if they're getting the storms later. And actually, they're not getting that first storm at all. So that one, the first little system, that looks like it can stretch down some light rain all the way down into Monterey Bay on about 10 p.m. Friday and maybe 4 a.m. Saturday. Very light rain. And it looks like Southern California almost completely missing out with that first system. Now with the second one, we'll see what happens. It looks like it starts to push in to Central and Southern California about 10 p.m. on Monday. And then it looks like that just kind of disappears. Might get a little rain in San Diego, but not all that much with the first wave. Now let's see what happens with the second wave. This looks like it's going to bring some heavier rain into the Central Coast 10 p.m. Tuesday. And then right there, that might actually be the frame of the forecast. That looks like the biggest weather event that we've talked about throughout this entire forecast today, where we're getting heavy rain into Los Angeles and heavy snowfall into some of the Southern California mountains at about 4 a.m. next Wednesday. So didn't really get the first system at all, didn't get the first wave of the second system. Then as we get into what exact timing is that? About 4 p.m. Tuesday to 10 p.m. Tuesday to 4 a.m. Wednesday. That right there looks to be the bulk of the storm, as it then moves down all the way into Oceanside and San Diego, bringing some heavy rain and snow there all the way through Tuesday and into Wednesday morning. Then, just like in NorCal, it looks like we ease up and it's just some light rain and snow. And it does appear to be continuing longer in Southern California. For example, NorCal looks like it's basically dry by Wednesday night. You'll notice in SoCal, we're going to have some lingering rain and snow, just light rain and snow. It's no longer the bulk of that system that's coming in 4 a.m. Wednesday, but that's going to continue to add on to our totals, which again helps when it comes to both fuel moisture and the drought and our rainfall deficits. So there's what fell yesterday. That doesn't show all the totals. I think San Diego overall picked up over a half an inch, possibly even an inch. There's the first one. Almost nothing for SoCal. Here's where that first part of the system just brings some light rain all the way down into Santa Maria. Not really even that much to even mention. Here's where the bulk of the system starts to push through. That's by about this time next week. You can see parts of Los Angeles, right where we were seeing that heavy rainfall come in. That's where we're seeing the greatest rainfall accumulations. That red color there are areas where we could be picking up over 2 inches of rain. And one thing you'll notice, it's this entire California coast looks to be getting at least an inch, possibly even an inch and a half. In the grand scheme of things, I still don't think it's going to be enough to get us out of our deficits, but certainly going to help, and it's at least moving us in the right direction versus drying us out even more. It's also interesting to look at the snowfall, because the Southern California mountains were actually picking up some large amounts of snowfall with this system. And you'll remember that at that 4 a.m. on Wednesday, when that bulk of the system looked to be right above Los Angeles, that's where a lot of that heavy snow was falling. And then that's where, in total, by this time next week, there are some parts in Southern California mountains where we've picked up over a foot, maybe even a foot and a half of snow. So overall, I think a good place to sum up. Overall, down here in New Mexico and Texas, we're in drought, and that's going to be being mixed over the next few days with warm temperatures, with extreme wind gusts, some dry fuels, so we have a fire danger there. So when it comes to the drought in this area, it's not exactly good news. When it comes to the drought in California, there is some good news in the forecast as we have a number of storms pushing through. Looking at it on this map, we have that first system coming through, bringing some rain, especially along the coast and into northern California. And then all next week, it looks like it might be raining. Constant rain and snow, especially some heavy rain and snow building into Southern California Tuesday night into Wednesday. We have that to look forward to. So while the drought is concerning here in New Mexico and Texas, and there's some bad news there with regards to the current forecast, because we're mixing that drought with extreme winds, warm temperature, dry air. In California, our current forecast is actually good news for the drought, where we're picking up at least an inch of rain. Again, not enough to get us out of that drought by any means, but certainly going to help as that storm seems to be moving over the state slowly all next week. One last look at the warnings. Overall, to sum up the weather for the United States today, I'd say it's overall a great day when it comes to weather. There's not seeing any tornado warnings, there's not hurricane warnings, or there's not giant wildfires currently burning right now. Weather-wise and extreme weather-wise, we're looking pretty good. And even warning-wise, there's not all that much going on and almost nothing going on for the entire eastern half of the country. Where we do have some warnings is right where what we've been talking about today, that red flag warning in New Mexico and Texas because of all that fire danger that we talked about today. And then up here in California and Oregon where we have that high wind warning where that first storm is starting to push through. And if I had to give a long-range forecast, I would say this map is going to look like this for some time to come. It looks like we're going to continue to be building some winds mixing in with that dry air in New Mexico and Texas. It looks like we're not going to have very much weather for the entire eastern half of the country for quite some time. And then I'll actually expect some of these storm warnings to start to show back up again in California because as we've talked about, there are a number of storms on the way. So again, forecast models change every day as we've seen in this video. I'll continue to do these forecasts every single day so that we can stay updated with what's going on. Hopefully you learned something today, and thank you for watching.